Our title tonight is Natural Remedies and Emotional Intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? It's understanding your emotions and the emotions of others and responding to those emotions, how? In a healthy way. By the way, just some of the details of where we are at emotionally. I was actually sitting next to a professor from UC Davis that teaches stats at UC Davis coming over here to Chicago today. And we entered into some discussions regarding the lack of emotional intelligence going on. Do you know when you get out there on a road and get into a car, we all know that a fatal accident is potential. But you are actually more likely to die out on that road, not from an accident. Did you know what the #1 cause of road fatalities are now today? Road rage. That used to be almost unheard of when I was growing up. No one died from that sort of thing. But now you are more likely to die from someone getting ticked off at you and then deciding to kill you. Or it might be a non-fatal accident and then they get upset at you over that non-fatal accident. And so we have some significant struggles. It's not just Guam and these islands that are having emotional health problems. It is all through the U.S. So it's understanding your emotions and the emotions of others and responding to those emotions, even though they might be negative emotions in others, in a healthy way. So emotional intelligence contributes more to successful and enjoyable living than IQ does. And since emotional intelligence is learned rather than inherited, it can be improved upon. And we'll see evidence of that as things go forward. Well, Weimar has trademarked the term NEWSTART. It is used extensively when Ben Carson was running for president prior to 2016. One of the #1 questions that was asked on Google is, who are Seventh-day Adventists? And the General Conference came out with a statement saying Seventh-day Adventists are about health. They put some other things in there, and they mentioned NEWSTART. I had to tell the General Conference they needed to put that trademark term there as Weimar has trademarked it. But it does encompass those 8 natural remedies quite well. The N is nutrition. The E is exercise, the W water, the S sunlight, the T temperance, the A air, the R rest, and the T trust. And so we'll briefly go over those today because those are the natural remedies. People who are emotionally healthy are in control of their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. They're able to cope with life's challenges, and they can keep problems in perspective and bounce back from setbacks. This is, of course, extremely important, and it's one of the factors, it's probably the measurable factor that has been most tightly connected with living a fulfilling, a successful, and a happy life. By the way, there are some recent studies speaking of happy life and a fulfilled life. That's in contradistinction to a safe life. During the COVID pandemic, one of the most famous phrases when you were parting was, be safe. What does that mean? Don't get out of your house. Don't get out without a mask. Safety, when we start prioritizing safety, we are going to actually have significant emotional challenges coming our way. We do need to, of course, have it's not that we shouldn't prioritize safety at all, but it should never be our #1 priority. When it becomes #1 priority, we can go into it. It can cause all sorts of problems and all sorts of emotional health issues as well. Mental illness, major public health issue, even more in the spotlight since the COVID-19 pandemic. Mental health is now considered one of the greatest blights of our time. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 8 people in the world, almost 1 billion people are living with a mental disorder, and I would say it's over 1 billion now, because that was in what year? 2019. And the most conservative estimates is that with this pandemic, we actually had two pandemics going on, one that the news media was talking about, but there was a mental health pandemic, and the effects of it were even worse than the COVID pandemic. And there's been at least a 20% uptick in mental illnesses since that time, so well over 1 billion now. And as you can see, 26%. And at the beginning of the pandemic, which has been continually increasing since that time. 1 in 8 people, well, we mentioned that already. Almost 1 in 2 will experience a mental health disorder in their lifetime. And that's today, so it's probably even higher than that for those that are younger. In fact, this younger generation, you know, we deal with them a lot. They'll tell me that the abnormal people are the ones that are mentally healthy. That there's so much mental health problems in our generation that if you are mentally healthy, you're actually the abnormal one in regards to the epidemic that has occurred in our society. Annual costs of this are tremendous, 2.5 trillion, projected to increase to 6 trillion by 2030. Leading cause of mental health-related disease burdens is depression, while anxiety is the most prevalent mental health disorder. Additionally, the COVID-19 pandemic has been associated with increased rates of psychological distress, with prevalence ranging between 35% and 38% worldwide. So let's talk about a few things related to this NEWSTART aspect of things in regards to nutrition. One of the things that kind of disappoints me is a lot of these diets that are gaining in popularity, one of the most common signatures of pop diets are no grains. And, you know, whether it's the keto diet, no grains. Of course, you have the diet that's been most likely tried. In fact, over 50% of America has tried to be on this diet. Anyone want to guess what the diet is? Gluten-free diet. So the gluten-free diet is where most Americans are, and at the best, most liberal estimate, only 4% of the general public at most is sensitive to gluten. And gluten is actually very healthy for the other 96%. And it's even healthy mentally. So the severity of depression is actually lower, significantly lower in individuals with high grain consumption and high vegetable consumption. And so this keto diet, in fact, I gave a whole presentation on this. I won't give it here, on dietary myths. Dietary myths that have been disproven. But even the keto diet itself, where they talk about no carbs, no grains, all of this sort of thing, they're telling you to get at least 20% carbs in your keto diet because it's totally unsustainable if you don't. And so, you know, carbs are a major macronutrient that we need in our diet. And people are amazed when they come to depression and anxiety recovery and see this buffet with all of these healthy carbs on them, thinking that, wow, we have, you know, this is the wrong diet. We've been told to get rid of all these carbs and look at it in abundance. Of course, they find out why, and of course, they get better on such a diet like that. I was speaking to, well, there was someone in particular has a very severe autoimmune disease, daughter of a very famous individual that I won't name, that I've been involved in her care. But with the severe autoimmune disease, sometimes we do need to be restrictive. And in her case, we put her just on a vegetable diet. And of course, there's carbs in vegetables as well. But on the vegetable diet, the autoimmune disease that was inflicting her went completely away, gone. She was on all sorts of things, steroids, biologics, all of those sorts of things. She's now been on that diet for 6 weeks, and she's thinking, I can, you know, she's steroid-free now, but, you know, can I go without the biologics and things like that? And her father contacted me and says, why? Why would this diet work? And I brought him back to the book of Genesis. I said, before the fall, in Genesis, it says our diet were grains and fruits, nuts. They were not these green leafy vegetables. Why were green leafy vegetables allowed after the fall? The reason why is God knew we would be susceptible to disease. And most of the medications and herbs that treat disease are in the vegetable kingdom. And so if we can go totally in the vegetable kingdom when we're diseased, we can often see some pretty amazing results. But yet you'll even see diets that are vegetable-free as well as a part of a health diet. Now, B12 is an issue. Vitamin B12 deficiency plays a role in the formation of depression and its effects on the adrenergic system, the glutamatergic system, the serotonin system, and the dopamine system. People with B12 deficiency experience oxidative stress and changes in mitochondria tropic support, calcium buffering, and energy supply. These changes cause depression by producing atrophy, death of neurons, and decreased neurotransmitter signaling. Now, B12 is something we would have a commensurate relationship with. There's no B12 in the plant kingdom, and there's no B12 in the animal kingdom. So where do we get B12 from? It's from the bacteria kingdom. The bacteria in our colon, if they're healthy bacteria, are making B12, and that's why B12 is absorbed in the distal ileum right next to the colon. It's the only nutrient that's absorbed that far, that low. So that was part of the original design. All the other nutrients are absorbed way up the line. And so B12 is very important, but even a study at Weimar before I came there showed that some people, when they go plant-based, and by the way, animal food can have more B12 in it because it has more bacteria. It's more contaminated, and so we can get B12 in animal products because it is contaminated. In fact, some people say, well, you know, just tell people not to brush their teeth and tell them not to wash their food. You know, the dirt with that manure has B12 in it. No, we want people to wash their fruits and vegetables. We want people to brush their teeth. But we want them to also have a source of B12. Not every plant-based vegetarian will run into that problem. It's only 1 in 3, but 1 in 3 is still significant. So if you're plant-based, it's good for you, or even if you're not plant-based. 99% of people with B12 deficiency are meat eaters in this country. They have an absorption problem. And so this isn't a problem just of vegetarians, but in some subgroups, vegetarians are reported to have more depression simply because of their lower B12 levels, 2.5 times lower the risk. B6 is also important. This can help anxiety and depression. Lower intake of vitamin B6, you're much more set up for it, and it increases those possibilities significantly. There's an inverse relationship between vitamin B6 and your ability to manage stress. And women who use oral contraceptives can prevent the depression caused by the oral contraceptives simply by taking 100 milligrams of vitamin B6 daily. Folate is also important. Of course, we get that word from foliage. It's in leafy greens, but it's in legumes. Lentils are the number 2 folate food, and black-eyed peas are number 1. Folate will help you with irritability. Behavioral disorders go up when folate levels go down. Increased responsiveness of antidepressants. In fact, there's something called treatment-resistant depression. That will be caused by folate deficiency. No medication on the planet will solve that. But folate will. Diet will. And by the way, this is something the government has targeted. Most Americans are short in folate. It's a very significant problem among Americans. And if you get on a keto diet, you're going to be triply short in folate. It's going to go down significantly as a result of not eating those healthy carb foods that have folate. Folate will improve your serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine levels in the brain. Oxidative stress and depressive behaviors caused by stress are prevented by folic acid. And then a very important mineral we're learning more about is magnesium. Magnesium itself will increase brain serotonin levels and improves depression and anxiety in just 2 weeks by taking 500 milligrams of magnesium oxide or 248 milligrams of elemental zinc per day. and it helps with methylation and augments other neurotransmitters, including GABA-aminobutyric acid, which is what helps us to feel calm under stress. Magnesium levels are very important for Alzheimer's, stroke, diabetes, hypertension, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, migraines, and central nervous system function. In fact, a lot of people with migraines, if they just get on magnesium and maybe a little butterbur on top of it, the migraines will no longer be occurring. It also has a protective effect against overstimulation that leads to neuronal cell death. And it has antidepressant properties and increases the effectiveness of antidepressant drugs. These are the foods higher in magnesium. You can see spinach, Swiss chard there at the bottom, excellent sources of magnesium. And then selenium, an important antioxidant in protecting the brain and nervous system, taking a role in the proper functioning of selenoproteins. It's also important in thyroid metabolism, and high selenium inversely associated with the risk of depression. Depression symptoms decrease in individuals given additional selenium supplementation. Zinc has gotten the most publicity because of its ability to increase receptors for serotonin. They're even putting it now in the new antidepressants. They're putting zinc in it to try to augment the effect of the antidepressant. 2 weeks of zinc supplementation increased the HT1 and HT2 receptors, and it improved ADHD symptoms as well. And the brain is known to have the highest level of zinc compared to other organs, and it's effective in neural transmission associated with depression, such as dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, and it shows antidepressant properties in a number of different ways. So we're measuring everyone's zinc level coming in, and we're also measuring their functional zinc aspect because of how important it is in overall mental health. Inverse relationship found between dietary zinc intake and risk of developing depression in female university students as well. So the foods higher in zinc are going to be your pumpkin seeds, even wild rice, pine nuts have it as well, and pumpkin seeds actually are equal, it's not up there, equal to hemp seeds as well in zinc. Now people have wondered why we don't have people drink liquid with their meals. That was more from my GI standpoint, because I understand gastric emptying and gastrointestinal metabolism, but recently a study was done showing the frequency of main meal consumption. If you're drinking liquids with your main meals, the rate of food chewing is inversely associated with depression scores. We found a significant association between intrameal fluid intake and depression. So that association means that if you're drinking liquids with your meals, your risk of depression goes up than if you're not drinking liquid with your meals. And that was just recently published. And now the microbiome is much more important than we thought it was. We thought it was important only for B12. But we now recognize it is so important in many ways, and this is also the GI-brain connection. GABA synthesized in the intestinal microbiota by probiotic bacteria plays a role in the synthesis of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, histamine, glutamate, dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine, which is used extensively in the frontal lobe. Probiotic bacteria lactobacillus and several others are involved in dopamine synthesis, play a role in the regulation of functions such as concentration, motivation, mood, psychomotor speed, ability to enjoy. This was an interesting study done on adults 18 to 65. They were just given certain strains of healthy bacteria for 16 weeks, and the symptoms of depression significantly reduced. 10 clinical studies did a meta-analysis, and they observed probiotics were effective in reducing depressive symptoms, but there was no significant change in the anxiety status of patients. But it does help with depression. It also improves GI function. So what food do bacteria like to thrive? It's the high-fiber foods. Fiber is not absorbed so that the bacteria can actually be happy. And if the bacteria are happy, you'll be happy as well. And so once again, the keto diet doesn't come out on top there as well. There's so much more we could mention, but let me just briefly quote a recent review that was done on nutrition and mental health by a peer-reviewed journal in Great Britain, one of the most prestigious journals. Now is the time for the recognition of the importance of nutrition and nutrient supplementation in psychiatry. Nutritional medicine should now be considered as a what? Mainstream element of psychiatric practice. So if the doctor's not talking about diet when you have a mental health issue, if he's not talking about nutrients, he is old school and he is behind the times. There's actually more evidence now for lifestyle medicine approaches when it comes to depression and anxiety than there is pharmaceutical traditional approaches. That's how much research has advanced in the last few years over this. So a lot of times people think what we're doing at Weimar is close to quackery because they're just used to a traditional aspect, and they don't realize what we're doing is actually even more scientific than what you're getting in a psych institution in regards to the medicine that may be offered there. So exercise. According to a recent report presented by the World Health Organization, and members of the European Union are far too sedentary, do not get the minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical exercise per week recommended by the WHO. That's not a lot per se. Erica and I mentioned, or Erica mentioned 4 miles. That's 4 miles of mountain climbing uphill. So there's good aerobic activity with that. And so we're getting a lot more than that, but the very minimum should be 150 minutes a week. And these levels of physical activity could help prevent 11.5 million new cases of non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and what else? Depression. Researchers at the University of South Australia recently unveiled the results of a large-scale study suggested that exercise of any kind could be a serious approach to managing depression. In some cases, physical activity may be more effective than current treatments for mental disorders, including anxiety and psychological distress. And by current treatments, they're talking about medicine and counseling. Physical activity is highly beneficial for improving symptoms of depression, anxiety, and distress, while all types of physical activity and exercise are beneficial for mental disorders, including walking or fitness exercise. It appears that duration and intensity play a role in their effectiveness. Exercise interventions lasting 12 weeks or less in the studies were found to be most effective in relieving mental health symptoms, as were the higher intensity exercises. So people may be suffering from depression, postpartum, women, even healthy people or people with HIV or people with kidney disease benefited the most as far as the effects of exercise. And so those are 5 groups that include most everybody. Interestingly, the scientists also stated physical activity is 1.5, that means 50% more effective than counseling or medications usually given to combat symptoms of depression. So we think it's kind of bad when someone doesn't go to a doctor and end up with an antidepressant when they have depression, but if they gave them these prescriptions, this was actually more important than the medication prescription that we're given. So the question is, why not a first-line treatment? Physical activity is known to help improve mental health, yet despite the evidence, it has not been widely accepted as a first-choice treatment. And it really should be. The evidence is clear. The doctor should be talking about this first before they're talking about what drug to put the patient on. We hope this review will underscore the need for physical activity, including structured exercise interventions, as a mainstay approach for managing depression and anxiety, said Professor Carol Maher, who also worked in the study. Water, very simple remedy, but very important for the brain and the body. Inadequate water intake leads to difficulty staying focused, impaired short-term memory, impaired recall of long-term memory, diminished ability to perform mental arithmetic, mental fatigue, headaches, as well as depressed mood. Those who drink the least amount of water, less than 2 glasses a day, which most Americans are in that category, combined with those who drink the most, I should say compared with those who drink the most, which is 5 or more glasses, which is still not ideal till you get up there more like 7 or 8 or more, doubled their risk of depression and anxiety. Quite a bit of difference. Just 3 more glasses from 2 to 5 can make the difference. After researchers controlled for potential confounders, they found that not drinking enough water was associated with a 73% increased risk of depression in men, 54% increased risk of depression in women. Children also showed improved memory, focus, and cognitive ability after drinking just 1 more glass of water per day. Then they did a study on teens. Given the limited availability of brain metabolic resources, these findings suggest that prolonged states of reduced water intake in teens adversely impact executive functions. What part of the brain is that? That's the frontal lobe of the brain, such as planning and visual spatial processing. Water is also important, however, in contrast baths, known as hydrotherapy, a series of short, repeated immersions in water alternating between hot and cold temperatures. It's been used in sports medicine, athletic training, rehab settings. It also stimulates your immune system. Your monocytes go up. Your ability to fight COVID goes up. And it increases the blood flow and oxygenation to tissues, including the brain, decreases swelling and stiffness. Often inflammation is improved as well, promotes healing, and improves depression. We call it nature's shock treatment instead of the seizure-induced shock treatment. A little bit of background on this. We used to run depression and anxiety programs 18 days in length when we started out at the Oklahoma Lifestyle Center of America. And it was like our 3rd program. We had a very resistant case of depression who was the wife of a professional in Alaska. And it was day like 14, and we only have 4 more days to go. And she's not any better. We're evaluating her. She's not better. The other patients are concerned about her. We're getting near the end of the program. What are we going to do? At Lifestyle Center of America, we couldn't keep them more than 18 days. It's different at Weimar. If someone needs more time, we can keep them almost as long, or virtually as long as they need to, in most cases, unless it's some sort of Christmas, pre-Christmas program or something like that. But we decided at that point to give her contrast hydro. She wasn't very interested in it, but by day 3, she was doing better than the other patients. And they all came to us and said, there's only 1 more day to go, but we want what you're giving her, because we see the major difference in her. And after that, we decided, you know what, if as long as there's not a contraindication, let's just put everyone through that. And then we noticed that people were getting better in 10 days. And so we were able to shorten it, make it less expensive, make it more available by doing that. And the contrast hydrotherapy is pretty amazing in its benefit, and there's a lot of side benefits as well. Well, we're at sunlight. Sunlight, risk of developing depression, 3.5 times higher in individuals with vitamin D deficiency. Cholecalciferol, in a group of 3 months, decreased the depression score and increased serum serotonin levels in individuals with moderate, severe, and extreme depression, according to the Beck Depression Scale. And so we used to think that most of the benefits of sunlight were vitamin D. But then we did studies on supplements versus getting your vitamin D up from sunlight, and we recognized sunlight was far more powerful in its health-giving effects than just vitamin D. We didn't know why until recently. What sunlight gives us is not just vitamin D from the ultraviolet, but even more important, it gives us infrared. Infrared penetrates our clothing. You can also get it when it's not direct sun. To get vitamin D from the sun, your shadow has to be shorter than you are. In other words, you have to get direct sun. Up here in Illinois, in December, even at high noon, you look at your shadow, it's longer than you are. You're not able to get any vitamin D up here in the wintertime. Hopefully you've gotten enough in the summer to store it. It's stored in our fat. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. And in yesteryear, everybody was outdoors, agricultural society, so they stored their vitamin D. But infrared you can get in the wintertime, as long as the sun is up. You also get it reflective off of the trees. Infrared, ultraviolet only penetrates the skin very shallowly. So you're making vitamin D just right in that skin itself or right underneath it. Infrared can even penetrate bones, and it goes down 7 centimeters. Now, where infrared interacts with is our mitochondria. When it hits our cells, our mitochondria actually start producing right around it intracellular melatonin. This is not something we can measure in the bloodstream. At night, you make melatonin from sleep and from darkness, and that's circulatory melatonin. Why do you need that melatonin at night? Because you're not able to get any because there's no sun out. But in the daytime, our cells make far more melatonin than what our brains make at night in response to darkness. And that actually helps the energy section of our cells, the mitochondria. And interestingly, in the brain, the mitochondria are all centered in the gray matter of the brain. Have you seen where the gray matter is at? If you take a brain, where is the gray matter at? If you cut that brain, it's right on the surface. And that surface can interact with the infrared light, and it helps our brain cells significantly in its intracellular protection. And so this is one of the things. 2 weeks ago, we had Dr. John Scharfenberg speak at Weimar University. He's 100 years old, or he's in his 100th year of life. He's going to be turning 100. He drove himself there. He walked on his own power. He even ran up a hill after me. Neil, 100 years old, no cane, no walker. Preached a great sermon. Hopefully you can see it online. And then in the afternoon, he gave a health lecture on how you can live to 100 like he has. And of course, he had brothers that were on a similar diet than him and all of that. And he said, they died in their late 80s. Why am I still going? And he talked about the advantages of being outdoors. And he talked about this light aspect and this sun aspect, and also working with his hands. He loves working out in his garden and all of those sorts of things. And he says there's no question now with the research that this has given me a significant advantage. You know, the sunlight aspect of things may be as important as the end. We've emphasized nutrition a lot, but the S is kind of an equal natural remedy in there. And this is the bane of our present day because devices have taken us indoors. You know, even yesteryear when we didn't grow up with devices, if you had free time, you didn't stay in the house. You went outside. It was just driving you outside if you had free time. Now if people have free time, they're in the house with their devices. 91%, this was in 2019, 91% of people's time in America are spent indoors. And we've seen successively, you know, starting in 2016 when everyone was having these phones, we have seen longevity decrease in America. It was always increasing until 2016, it went down. 2017 went down even further. 2018 went down even further. COVID, it went down. By the way, one of the interesting things on COVID studies, when we were looking at Brazil and some of these third world places, the COVID patient who was put next to the window had significantly higher survival rates than the bed that was not next to the window. Infrared can penetrate windows as long as it's not infrared blocking. And that infrared blocking intracellular melatonin, by the way, the one supplement, and we know vitamin D was important, but with COVID, the one supplement that showed the biggest change in randomized controlled trials in you surviving COVID and preventing long-term COVID was actually melatonin. Melatonin is the most potent antioxidant known to mankind, and our cells make it in response to interacting with infrared light. By the way, the study on melatonin in oral was 10 milligrams at bedtime, which is quite a bit, but taking 10 milligrams of bedtime of melatonin, that's higher antioxidant potential than even NAC. NAC is also a potent antioxidant that can help us, and melatonin even was more superior to that. So we need to be getting outdoors as much as we can, and this can help us considerably. Temperance. Moderation in the use of healthy substances, abstinence from unhealthy substances. And alcohol is very clear now. In fact, the largest studies done on alcohol throughout the world, published by the World Health Organization, have now stated there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. No safe level. People talk about drinking safely. It's impossible. Because alcohol is a poison. It does shorten life, even in small amounts and even in irregular amounts. In fact, one drink every 15 days increases a woman's risk of breast cancer by 60%. You know, it's significant, and it does things in regards to males and others as well. But we've made a big mistake in our country regarding marijuana. Cannabis use has been shown to impair numerous cognitive functions, basic motor coordination to more complex executive function tasks, including the ability to plan, organize, solve problems, make decisions, remember, and control emotions and behavior. Cannabis appears to exert impairing effects on executive function even after 3 weeks or more of abstinence. And basic attentional and working memories abilities are largely restored long-term once we quit, but enduring and noticeable deficits are found in decision-making, concept formation, and planning. In fact, the largest study done by the National Academy of Sciences shows that long-term marijuana use lowers IQ permanently. But more concerning than this is what it does in regards to psychosis. Marijuana-induced psychosis, look it up. THC induces psychosis. And by the way, the marijuana plants that are available today, much higher THC than what the hippie fathers and grandfathers were using back in the hippie generation. It wasn't good for them either, but particularly the THC dosage today is alarmingly high, and it causes nihilism. One of the things that you'll see, and unfortunately our press is not reporting on it, and they should report on it. I shouldn't say they're not reporting in general. There was one group that reported on it, but they were attacked with no evidence of basing on their attack on it, showing that these mass shootings, there's one common substance on board every mass shooter. It's not alcohol, it's marijuana. Alcohol does not induce psychosis. It's a frontal lobe deficit, but it doesn't cause you may, if you're in an argument and a fight, it may cause you to go over the edge because you don't have the frontal lobe, and so your murder rates are higher, et cetera. And sexual indiscretion is higher with alcohol, including rape. But alcohol does not cause people to go into a place and shoot up people they don't know. Marijuana does, because of its tight association with nihilism. Nihilism is where you just think it's better for everybody to be eliminated. And so you actually think you're helping people out going into this place and annihilating everybody as you shoot them up. Simple remedy. We talk about guns and all this sort of thing. Marijuana on board, no weapons. And now we can detect it if they've had it for the last 3 days. So you get your drug test and you fill out this paperwork, and if you're going to start using marijuana, you better give up your weapons. Now, of course, that doesn't happen in everybody that uses marijuana, and of course that's the argument of those that get angry when I say this, is not everybody that uses marijuana shoots everyone up, but everyone who shoots everyone up does have marijuana on board. And marijuana is not a necessary ingredient in our diet or in our mental health. In fact, it's causing a lot more issues. And so we have many people coming to our program under the effects of marijuana. And somehow they get this idea that's not addictive either until they try to withdraw from it. And so it is something that's easier to withdraw from than some things out there, but it's still an addictive substance. And we need to be preaching the temperance of that. By the way, in Guam, we gave them this material. I talked about it with the judges, and the Speaker of the House came up to me and said, we just voted last year to legalize marijuana. Nobody was telling us any of this stuff. It was the business interests coming in. We need to really revisit all this. I said, absolutely, you need to revisit this. She goes, well, I'm really glad to get this material because nobody was presenting this at all in the legislature. And the studies are very, very clear on it. Caffeine is the most commonly consumed drug, and it also is a frontal lobe suppressant, but again, not one that's going to cause you to be nihilistic, but it can decrease your ability to problem solve. And by the way, caffeine kills people every year. A lot of people don't recognize this. I don't know why. They still legalize caffeine powder, but you can go into a convenience store and get some caffeine powder. And a lot of people don't realize, hey, you know, there's a teaspoon here. I really need to stay awake tonight as I'm driving through all of this, and they'll take a teaspoon of caffeine. Do you know how many milligrams is in a teaspoon of caffeine? 2,400 milligrams. And they will die that night. They will go into all sorts of tachyarrhythmias. They'll go into congestive heart failure. They'll go into an ICU. Beta blockers won't reverse it. You can't reverse this stuff, and they will die from caffeine poisoning. And it doesn't show up in the news. It doesn't show up in those sorts of things, but it's something that should be eliminated. And a lot of it's just ignorance. You know, you feel bad for these people who thought, hey, I can drink 2 energy drinks. I can certainly get a teaspoon of this stuff down. Outside fresh air, we talked about that by the sunlight, but I should say something else about outside fresh air. We have found out that it's not just the sun out there, but it's interacting with plants, and the Japanese actually were the first ones to study this, and they called it forest bathing. The effects of forest bathing. What are the effects of forest bathing? Being out in the forest, these forests eliminate oils, and these oils interact with our nasal passages and directly affect our mental health. They can actually enhance our frontal lobe. They can enhance our mood. There's a whole industry based on this now where you can try to get this inside by buying an essential oil and putting it in a dispenser. But it's far better to get outdoors. And to get this from the plants themselves in the right dosage. By the way, you have to be careful on those dispensers as well. You can overdose on some of these essential oils as well, so you have to be very careful. But outside fresh air has significant benefits. Adequate rest, we could go into the effects of sleep, etc., but I see the time, and so I want to wrap things up here. Trust is also important. Devotions, church attendance. By the way, a significant study done by the American Medical Association, Student Association, by the way, showed that church attendance prevents suicide. It's actually pretty significant. It's like almost a 50% suicide reduction among church attenders in young people. By the way, is there an antidepressant that decreases the risk of suicide? There isn't one. In fact, they have black box warnings. They first can increase the risk of suicide because they worsen impulsivity before they improve the depression, and suicide is often an impulsive act. Many suicide victims were placed on medication within a month of committing suicide. And the antidepressant effects had not kicked in, but the impulsivity effects had. But they're not given the instruction at the psychiatrist's office is, how is your spiritual life? Should you go back to church? Or maybe you should try a church. Maybe you should try a church that actually is into health. Maybe that might help you. Trusting God's rules or instructions instead of our own. One of our brilliant counselors, Don McIntosh, some of you might know him, but he's developed a spiritual inventory that gets to the core of issues in everybody. The atheists, in fact, I'll just tell you about a story of an atheist that went through. This guy was from University of Michigan, and he backs up in regards to the commandment. So the first question he asks is, the last commandment is thou shalt not what? Covet. Why does not God want us to covet? He wants us to be satisfied. So he says, how satisfied are you with your life? Oh, very dissatisfied. Why are you dissatisfied? And it gets into that. All right, has anyone lied to you, or are you lying to anybody else? Is that part of the problem? So he's backing up on commandment 9. Then he goes to commandment 8. Has anyone taken anything from you? Have you taken anything from anyone else that you shouldn't have? Then he goes into the 7th commandment. Are there issues with intimacy? Are there issues with this or that? Then he goes into the 6th commandment, which is about life, really. It's about thou shalt not kill. But what are you doing health-wise? Are you enhancing your life, or are you accelerating its decline? And then what about the authority figures in your life? How are your relationship with your authority figures? It actually only takes them about 20 minutes to go through this. And there have been counselors, we also have counselors come through our program. Licensed counselors that are CBT counselors, they can have their own issues. And one counselor that went through mentioned, you've learned more about me in 20 or 25 minutes than any counselor ever has, even after 8 or 10 sessions. How did you do that? Well, anyways, the atheist looked at him and said something very similar and said, how did you learn to do an inventory like that? That's amazing. You've learned all of the core issues of me in just that length of time. And he says, I actually learned it from God. He says, what? He says, yeah, I learned it from God. He said, do you know the portion of the scriptures that were written by God himself? Is there a part of the Bible that they say God wrote? And said, yeah, he actually wrote it in stone. It's called the 10 Commandments. Oh, I'd heard about them. I don't even know what the 10 Commandments are. He says, I've just covered them with you. Wow, the guy says, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I want to be able to look into that. And this fellow from the University of Michigan, he's now attending the Ann Arbor Seventh-day Adventist campus church there. He's getting ready to graduate from University of Michigan. And our last visit we have an extended support plan that's an option now in our program where you can sign up for 20 weeks and continue to get counseling and doctor visits. But the last visit with me was not about the doctor part. He says, I really want to be baptized and join this church, but he says, I don't want to be disrespectful to my parents at all because they're not going to be a bit happy about this. Can you give me some ideas on how I can introduce this to my mom and dad? And I gave him some ideas. Tell them what it's done for your health. Tell them what it's done for your mental health. They're going to be interested in you being mentally healthy. Your mother actually went through this program as a companion with you. She knows about it. She's going to be positive, maybe more positive than your dad because she knows us and all this, and gave him the ideas. He says, thank you so much. This visit is so valuable. Just because of that, I'm going to follow through with that. I don't know if he's talked to them yet or that side of things. But this is, again, the entering wedge. And when we put NEWSTART with that final T together, which is important, what a difference it can make. This is a recent program for anxiety. Anxiety is known to be far more difficult to treat. You can see the significant difference in the 19 people that came with anxiety, their average. But notice the emotional intelligence. This is 25 in this program. This is their pre-EQ score. In just 10 days, the white is the post-EQ scores. And you can see how not only are they very likely leaving the program depression-free and anxiety-free, but their emotional intelligence has climbed to just below average to way above average. That's the top 4 percentile of the nation leaving, which means they are set up to be able to solve the problems in their life. They're set up as they engage in the program to have continued mental health, and of course their spiritual health is going to be a major aspect, because we really can't, what they learn before they go home is they can't really follow that program as much as it seems rational to do so when it goes against our self-centered desires. And so this is why they really can't do this. This is what Guam hasn't figured out yet. They're very excited about it. They see the before and after results. but no one can follow the most optimal program for them unless they are first willing to put their all on the altar of sacrifice for God. And if we're willing to give ourselves to God, then God can give us the power and the grace to accomplish all of these things in our life. And that's why medical missionary work is so important, because it opens the need for the practical gospel in their life to follow these things so that they don't self-sabotage themselves later. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you as we have covered some natural remedies and its role on emotional intelligence. But I think our health message is actually more, we've talked about our brains and our bodies and longevity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, all those things. It's helpful and it's well documented. But I think God gave us the health message more because of what it does to the brain. And as we optimize this very important creation that he gave all of us, we can be more blessed and live a more abundant life.